Hello folks, my name is Brady and we are back with the Social Stud Live post show. And today we're going to be doing another video from RealLifeLore. We checked them out for the first time last week. I don't know if that made it into this week's playlist or not. I'm making it after I record the post show, so I have no idea what I'm doing for the main show. I guess we'll see. You've probably already seen. Was it good? I hope it was good. So today we're going to be doing a video called Why Indonesia is Moving Their Capital City. Programming note, I don't know if I've sorted this out by the time the main show has gone on. Maybe I have, maybe I haven't. I'm having some issues with the software that I record in. That's kind of caused me a lot of problems with my audio. I lost a lot of my original settings, so I've had to kind of figure out all my settings from scratch. In some ways, I think I've improved it, but it's still, I don't know. There might be some gaffes in this one. Bear with me if that is the case. I'm doing my best to improve things and keep the output going at the same time. I think visually and audio-wise, the streams are going to go through a little bit of an improvement in the near future. It's just going to take a minute for me to figure out exactly what that means or what that looks like. So we'll get there. We will absolutely get there. Hopefully this one's already fine, because I like some of this. I fixed my noise gate. Maybe that's better. Maybe it's worse. I don't know. I'm using my old microphone, which maybe it's all right. It's not that much different from the other one. I just like the other one more. I'm having trouble with it. So the old one's back. The oldie, but a goodie. All right, I've talked enough about programming stuff. It's not that interesting. It's just stuff that I feel the need to point out every time I'm dealing with something. I like to talk about my problems. So today, yeah, we're going to be doing another video from RealLifeLore. We checked out their video on Anchorage last week. This one is Why Indonesia is Moving Their Capital City. I think this one came out on the 22nd. So it's not all that old. This is still brandy new. I like RealLifeLore from what I've seen so far, which has been pretty limited. Visually, they're very interesting. They have a fun way of taking on modern geographical issues in a way that is engaging and new and fun to me. So I am going to be returning to their stuff pretty often if it's all that good, which I get a feeling that it's all of similar quality to that Anchorage video. So here we go. We have Indonesia. They're moving their capital city. I didn't know about this. I don't know why. So that's great, because that is the question in the title of the video, and seemingly what they're going to be telling me today. So I'm going to be able to learn a little bit about Indonesia. That's cool. Hopefully you learn as well. So we'll see where we go with this one.
This video is made possible by Micro Center. Get a free 128GB flash drive and 128GB micro SD card when you follow the link that's down in the description below. The location of a country's capital city is one of the most important choices for any nation's leaders to make. They contain important government facilities, offices, and headquarters, and usually contain the primary residence of the nation's leadership. The capital city is basically the brain.
Often when it comes to a nation's capital, historically in monarchies, the capital was where the king is. And that was important. If the king lived there, that was essentially the capital. While there were capitals where the king did not necessarily stay, in other examples or whatever, there are some cases where if the king picked up his stuff and decided to move to another place, that's essentially the capital now. We're in a new era. The old capital didn't seem as appealing. King's here. Things are going to start changing. It's not a consistent rule across the board, but I think it's a very interesting thing when you see it happen. For so long, the capital of Rome was not Rome. I mean, the capital of the Roman Empire wasn't Rome, which that's always fun. That's a bit more complicated than what I've laid out so far, but Fun talking about capitals. Complex.
Brain of a country, and choosing the location of where you want to place your brain is, of course, a highly strategic choice. Most often, the best location for a capital city is somewhere that can be easily defended, and from where you can exert control and project unity over the rest of the country. Capitals need to be seen as representative of the entire nation, and be easily accessible to the largest number of people possible. And for all those reasons, capitals are most often built within the center of a country. But sometimes, the choice of an old location ends up, eventually, just not working out. For example, in 2005, Myanmar moved their capital city away from Old Yangon, the largest city in the country.
Myanmar is an interesting thing. I learned about this, I think it was last month I learned about this the first time. Myanmar and Burma are the same place. Like on this map behind me, it says Burma, which is a dated name. Pretty much everyone besides the US recognizes it as Myanmar now. But for some reason, the United States never really moved on from that. I found out about this when I was looking at like an old globe and I was trying to date it, and I'm like, oh, this says Burma, not Myanmar, so it must have changed. But that's when I learned that the United States, for some reason, we still recognize it as Burma. Like, I haven't gotten into the nitty-gritty details of that, but if you see a modern globe and made in the United States, it still might say Burma.
In 2005, Myanmar moved their capital city away from Old Yangon, the largest city in the country, and towards Naypyidaw, Da, more than 300 kilometers to the north. This was done because Naypyidaw Da is more centrally located within the country than Yangon was, and it was also a transportation hub located right next to 3 chronically turbulent and rebellious states. And so it was felt that the presence of the capital and the military so nearby would help to improve the region's stability. And further, it was ruled that the old capital of Yangon was simply more vulnerable to climate disasters since it was located directly on the coast, as was showcased in 2008 when a cyclone smashed directly into it and destroyed 3/4 of the city's infrastructure. In a similar manner, Brazil also moved their capital city back in 1960 away from the historical.
I could argue, and this is a little bit silly, moving away from the place that's vulnerable would definitely make the people who were in that area of the country feel sort of left behind, though. But it's probably better to be out of there because you can help them and have things imported from a distance. Like if the capital city crumbles, the order will crumble a little bit and they'll be even less able to help you out. So in a modern world, staying away from places of disaster, the distance isn't really as much a problem anymore. Like maybe long ago you'd want to be nearby enough so that you could get resources in there quick, but it's a little easier to do that now than it used to be. So I don't know if that's so much of an issue anymore.
But by then overcrowded Rio de Janeiro on the coast and towards a deeper and more centralized location within the Brazilian interior that they ended up calling Brasilia. This decision was largely made in order to encourage inland growth away from the coasts and to make the capital city more regionally neutral. And then, of course, there was the Great Showdown in Australia back in 1927, when neither Sydney nor Melbourne could agree on which city should become the nation's capital.
Melbourne.
Thus, they ended up compromising by building Canberra roughly in between them from scratch. Now, in the year 2022.
That's interesting. That's something in the United States we can relate to a little bit because we created our capital as kind of a separate thing as well. We wanted it to be something that was kind of a neutral territory because they felt like people who were in any sort of state that had the capital would have a disproportionate amount of power in the country. Like if Virginia, let's say, had the capital, and at the time Virginia was particularly powerful, they'd have control over their own state, but they'd also have a certain level of additional control over the nation's whole capital. So they would not really, so the other states would feel like the leverage is in Virginia's direction, so they had to create sort of a neutral space, and that's why Washington, D.C. is the thing. That's the sort of fears of the time. I don't know. They're not this. They're not really there anymore. The way we treat our capital, I don't think it's nearly as much of a threat as it would have been at the time, and that's kind of why people are pushing towards DC statehood a little bit more, because like the issues that we had back when it was established as this neutral space, the whole debate is kind of antiquated at this point. So it's like, okay, now you have this neutral space, and it feels like the people living there only lose in the process. They're kind of underrepresented by not being their own, like, not being on the same level as all the other places.
By building Canberra roughly in between them from scratch. Now, in the year 2022, there are two very large modern countries who are actively in the process of relocating their capital cities for pretty familiar reasons.
I assume that was
Egypt.
Yeah, I thought that was Egypt.
In the year 2022, there are two.
Oh yeah, that's a sphinx and pyramids in the back. I was looking in the foreground, but I didn't even see the background. It was a dead giveaway.
Very large modern countries who are actively in the process of relocating their capital cities for pretty familiar reasons. Egypt is relocating their capital away from Cairo towards a newer, planned city still under construction a bit over to the east, while Indonesia is relocating their capital city away from Jakarta and moving more than 1,000 kilometers away to a completely different island.
I only recently, this is how little I know about Indonesia. I only recently learned that all of this stuff was Indonesia. I thought Indonesia was only like a few of these little island bits, but like it's much bigger than I originally thought. I guess when you look at like digital maps, they like have the little dotted lines or whatever in between nations or whatever, but it's a little harder to tell when it's a series of islands, because you don't get those hard divides, except maybe on like the little mainland bits we have in the middle here where they share some space with another nation.
And moving it more than 1,000 kilometers away to a completely different island.
That is more centered.
Incredibly significant, because Indonesia itself is an incredibly significant country. She has the fourth highest population of any country in the world, lagging only behind China, India, and the United States, and boasts more than 270 million people. For such a large country, however, Indonesia is rather unique because while China, India, and the United States are all major and generally contiguous continental powers, Indonesia is really about 17,000 totally separate islands, all scattered apart from each other, and these islands are not equal. There's
so
5
geographically
big land
unique
areas that Indonesia controls: the entire islands of Sumatra, Java, and Sulawesi, and half of the big islands of Borneo and New Guinea. However, 4 of these island territories are fairly sparsely populated, while the thousands of smaller islands add little to the overall population as well. By and large, that leaves the island of Java, which alone is home to more than 60% of the entire Indonesian population. 145 million people. This makes...
So wait, they wanted to move it to like this little island right above Java, though, right? Is that I believe it showed that they wanted to move it like over here, which is interesting that they'd not be moving it. As long as my understanding of what they're trying to explain has been good thus far, they're not moving it where all the population is. They're moving it kind of towards a more central area between all of the islands. They're which I guess if you moved it to Java, it would feel like I guess favoritism towards the more highly populated. There's so many reasons to be taken into consideration here. Yeah, you want to be where all the people is. There's something like democratic in principle there, because that's where the action's at, more or less. But you also want people elsewhere to feel equally represented. You don't want them to be resentful of the whole situation. So this is weird.
Java, by far the world's most populated island, with even more people than Russia, a country that is 123 times larger. And so it's pretty fair to say that this island is basically the center of Indonesia's population and culture. And so naturally, the capital of Indonesia has been located on Java for a very long time, and it's located right here, Jakarta. Jakarta has been a pretty major city for centuries, but with little fanfare in the modern 21st century world, the city's metropolitan population has skyrocketed to a population of around 35 million people, which makes Jakarta the second largest urban area in the entire world after only Tokyo, which, as fate would have it, is also located on another island. Besides serving as the capital of Indonesia, Jakarta is also the diplomatic capital of ASEAN, or the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, which is effectively Southeast Asia's.
Okay, I've actually heard of that. I don't know much about it. It's just one of those international union type things, I guess. I mean, we have things like the EU. There's a similar thing in Africa. There's a similar thing in the Americas. Like, that's pretty normal. That's understandable to think that there would be some sort of an international union based on like a shared geographic experience.
Version of the European Union, and so you can sort of think of Jakarta's role here as being similar to Brussels in Europe. Jakarta is an enormously important and significant global city, but it is not without problems that make it actually a not so favorable location for Indonesia's capital city in the 21st century. For one, as I mentioned previously, there is a lot of inequality within the country. While Java is home to 60% of Indonesia's population, the island only makes up 7% of Indonesia's land. Ultimately, that means that the remaining 93% of the country's landmass, over on the 17,000 other islands, are pretty underrepresented both in terms of population and in economics. While the economy in both Jakarta and Java has been growing tremendously over the past few decades, the other islands have been more or less economically left behind and have remained fairly stagnant. To illustrate this point, ever since 1971, Java has gained 75 million people, while Sumatra has only gained 38 million, Kalimantan, what the Indonesian side of Borneo is called, only 11 million, Sulawesi only about 10 million, while Western New Guinea only gained 4 million. And while these other islands may look close by on a map like this, they really aren't. If you place the islands of Indonesia over Europe with Java placed roughly over northern Italy, you'd quickly see that Kalimantan is as far away as northern Germany and Poland. Sulawesi.
This is the struggle of drawing a round thing on a flat surface. Things always get squished. I'm so glad that I have a map behind me. Like, I've been looking at it more often and it makes me feel a little bit better about this whole thing. It really is amazing how much putting a round thing on a flat surface distorts the scale of everything. Like, Africa tends to get it pretty bad due to its often central placement. I don't know why it's so consistently Africa. I know there is a reason, but I couldn't effectively articulate it to you. But I know it often gets that. I didn't know Indonesia also was a victim of this.
Is over in Belarus and Ukraine, while Western New Guinea is way over in Kazakhstan. A lot of these places are very far away from Jakarta and are therefore isolated and remote from the center of power, often across thousands of kilometers of ocean. Based exclusively on the centralization of power factor, it would make the most sense from a geographic perspective to place Indonesia's capital within either Kalimantan and Borneo or on Sulawesi. But of course, centralization alone is not usually a good enough reason to go through all of these moving pains.
It's just a reason.
Are that Jakarta itself has a lot of issues. To start, the city has experienced a tremendous amount of urban growth in the past few decades. Back in 1945, at the beginning of the Second World War, the city's population was only 600,000 people. 25 years later, by 1970, the city's population had increased by six-fold to more than 4 million. And then 50 years later from then, by 2020, it had more than doubled again, to more than 10.5 million within the boundaries of the city proper, largely owing to massive internal migration from the rest of Indonesia. As a result of all this growth, the city has been experiencing a substantial ecological breakdown, accompanied by intensely gridlocked traffic and congestion. Nearly 4.5 million cars and more than 13 million motorcycles are used on the city's streets, while public transportation.
So it's like they're literally running short on space based on how it's designed. Like, they can't effectively run things efficiently with so many people, so many cars, like, stuck into one place. That's interesting. in a situation like that, there are some cases where people would be incentivized to move elsewhere or whatever, but you don't really want people leaving such a hustle and bustling city. You want it to thrive with more people, and you would like ideally find a way to change the city around the people. But that in itself is a huge challenge.
Transportation only accounts for a third of the city's commuters. To exacerbate the pollutants from all these vehicles, there are 7 existing coal-fired power plants and 5 more planned plants, all within a 100-kilometer radius of the city. The emissions from those 5 planned plants alone will eventually be equal to adding 10 million additional cars to Jakarta's already crowded streets. Given
That's something that I find I've when I was first like made familiar of people wearing masks out in public, it is something that I saw in a lot of Asian countries where they wore the masks because of pollution, and with mask culture being far more normalized now all around the world, you can imagine that's something these people here are going to probably likely want to continue if they don't already do it, as pollution continues getting worse, if they're not able to really tackle that problem. Because it is better than not to have a mask on in a place where there's a lot of air pollution. Better than not.
this, air pollution and smog within the city is a serious issue, and it generally ranks alongside cities like New Delhi and Beijing. The air quality can get so bad here that just last year in 2021, 172 days were considered too unhealthy to be outside, which was more than half of the entire year. And then, of course, there's the traffic itself. Jakarta has often been named the world's worst city for traffic on multiple occasions by multiple publications. But here are some ways to put it all into perspective. It's been estimated before that the average Jakarta resident will spend 10 years of their lifetime there in traffic. The largest satellite city of Jakarta, where many downtown office workers live, is Bogor, 25 miles away from Jakarta. Under normal Jakarta traffic conditions,
Sorry, that just feels like a name I would make up for like a fantasy character.
it usually takes 2
So does Jakarta. To be fair, they both sound like fantasy names.
hours to drive across those 25 miles. And when the conditions are considered bad, it can take more like 3 hours. It's gotten so bad that high-ranking government officials have to regularly be escorted by police convoys through the city just to arrive at their meetings on time. And to make matters even worse, Jakarta's
getting special
population
treatment?
is still growing. By 2030, it's
How dare
projected
they?
that there will be more than 40 million people living within the metropolitan area, more than the entire population of Canada, and causing it to
Criminy.
surpass even Tokyo to become the world's newest, largest city. But out of all of Jakarta's many problems, it's water that is the most severe. As with many coastal cities across the world, Jakarta is not unique in dealing with the threat of rising sea levels. But Jakarta's specific situation is rather unique because on top of dealing with sea levels rising, the city is simultaneously sinking. Jakarta's sinking problem is very similar to both Mexico City and Venice, both of which I've made videos about in the past, but this is the gist. Just like both of those cities, Jakarta was established within a swampy environment many centuries ago before the needs of modern cities were at all understood. 13 rivers flow through the city, which used to provide ample fresh water, but now they're all wildly polluted and currently unusable for drinking water. Jakarta does have a series of water pipes, but they only reach about 60% of the population, and they're all highly concentrated in the more wealthy areas of South and Central Jakarta.
Of course.
As for the millions of other people who don't have any access, ground pumping is basically the only means of obtaining any fresh water for themselves. But of course, as this water beneath the surface is removed, the soil above will continue to compact and sink. And it doesn't help that nowadays there are dozens of massive and heavy concrete and steel skyscrapers across the city's surface, adding even more weight and pressure, pushing down onto the fragile soil below. As a result of all these contributing factors, the entirety of Jakarta is now sinking into the ground by about 1 centimeter a year. But there are some areas seeing as much as 25 centimeters of sinkage a year. When you take rising sea levels into consideration, it's easy to see why most of the city will very shortly be in grave danger. And while floods are already a chronic problem that the city faces, it's nothing compared to what might happen in the future. The entire city rests within a flat basin, and according to some estimates, 40% of Jakarta is already sitting beneath.
I live in a place where, like, when I was a little younger, we had a pretty significant flood. But I never got to see, like, the parts that were, like, this bad. It's truly hard to relate to. I find that absolutely fascinating. That's actually a story worth telling at a later point of the Great Flood, as I recall.
While many others predict that by 2050, only 28 short years from now, the entire city proper of more than 10.6 million people will be buried beneath the sea like a modern-day Atlantis, assuming that nothing is actually done about it. But of course, there is a plan to do something about it, and it's insane. In 2014, the Indonesian government revealed the plans for what they called Giant Seawall Jakarta, expected to be completed by 2025.
Oh, I've seen this.
Eventually construct a titanically sized seawall across the entirety of Jakarta Bay to protect the city from the ocean beyond. The wall is planned to be constructed in the form of a Garuda, a giant legendary bird from the Hindu and Buddhist faiths that is also the national.
Okay, I don't know if I've seen this. I think I might have seen something that looked kind of similar to this. This looks amazing. Oh my god.
Symbol of Indonesia. The whole structure is intended to be iconic and boost tourism, and it draws heavy inspiration from nearby Singapore's Sentosa Island project. After the massive bird guardian is constructed, Jakarta Bay itself is intended to become a water reservoir enclosed inside that will eventually become a vast new source for fresh, clean water in the city. Jakarta's 13 rivers that all flow into the bay today are all planned to be cleaned up and cleared of pollution in order to keep their currently polluted outflows from transforming the bay into a stagnant cesspool. Meanwhile, the giant seawall itself is intended to become a new center of Jakarta's urban development, complete with.
I like this type of stuff, this crazy stuff, this ambitious future infrastructure stuff that people are like, no, it just can't be done. Because I think we get so complacent in how things currently are that we just don't have the ambition to do things that are like certifiably insane, but like the type of stuff that we dreamed of the future looking like. So no matter what anybody says, I'm down with the bird wall.
Housing, roads, and railways that connect back to the mainland that should all be capable of hosting a new population of 2 million people. The whole project is expected to carry a steep price tag of about $40 billion.
Well, yeah.
It doesn't come without controversies. For one thing, it would require the eviction of many nearby residents and the seizing of private lands along the coast.
Okay, I'm actually not cool with that. Oh, you remember when I said no matter what? I don't really like that. I like it if, like, you incentivize people, or maybe... man, that is a hard decision, because you make these big choices, and, like, people are there. People live here.
Something that many locals depend upon for their livelihoods. Further, there are fears that if the wall were to ever fail because of something like a terrorist attack or some unforeseen black swan event, that the subsequent flooding would be catastrophic and probably end up destroying the city anyway in the future when sea levels are higher. This all means that the wall will end up being a critical security weak point that Indonesia would have to defend at all costs. And then there are many, many environmental concerns about building the wall to just heap on top of everything else. So with all of these these negative factors going against Jakarta, and the obvious need to alleviate the growing population pressure and weight on the sinking city, the current leader of Indonesia, President Joko Widodo, made a bold announcement in 2019 to move the capital city away from Jakarta for the first time. And while the specifics of the exact location and plan are still in the stages of being figured out, things are moving.
So we're gonna get an update on this, I hope, at some point in the future, because I am curious to how this plays out. Like, I hope they. I don't know what they would do. I don't know enough about the existing Indonesia geography to have any sort of an opinion on this. I just kind of like the ambitious infrastructure idea, even though it's like there are some downsides to it. Like in spirit, I want it to succeed. I want them to figure it out. But yeah, I get it. Like, I don't understand the deep layers to this very complex issue. This is merely my introduction to it. So any statements I make should not be taken as anything but just kind of the mental diary of somebody who's excited to see something interesting happening in the world.
Pretty quickly. For one, we know that the general area of the new capital will be nearly 1,000 kilometers away from the current-day Jakarta, over on the island of Borneo, which happens to be the third largest island in the world, and it means that Indonesia's capital will be on an island shared with two other countries in the north, Malaysia and Brunei. Borneo is largely covered by rainforest and is sparsely populated, but it possesses several advantageous features for Indonesia's new capital city. First, the Indonesian government itself already owns a large part of the land over on their side of the border, making it easy to build a brand new planned capital city. Compared with Jakarta, the risk of disasters here are rather minimal, whether it be from floods, earthquakes, tsunamis, or especially from volcanoes. Indonesia's geography is dominated by volcanoes, and many of their eruptions across the archipelago have been some of the most destructive disasters in all of human history. The top two most powerful volcanic eruptions ever in recorded human history both took place in Indonesia, at Krakatoa in 1883 and at Mount Tambora.
Krakatoa, where have I heard that? Bird Mom? Have we heard the term Krakatoa? Is that the Krakatoa? Is that from the SpongeBob thing when Squidward got volcano powers? He was like Krakatoa. I think that's what that is. I knew I didn't know this for a smart reason.
Oh. Yeah.
It is. Oh, sorry, birds on the keyboard.
Both of which
Okay, it was Squidward. Okay. Oh, I wish I knew that for a better reason. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Caused enormous destruction. 74,000 years ago, the Toba supervolcano erupted on Sumatra and was so destructive that it caused a 6-year-long global volcanic winter and may have almost led to the early extinction of the entire human species. Today, there are at least 127 active volcanoes across the country, and more than 5 million Indonesians live within their danger zones. But
dude, are they straight up on a tectonic plate or something?
If you notice on this map, there aren't any major active volcanoes on Borneo, which, from a risk perspective, makes it far safer for the country's brain to be located there than on either Java or Sumatra. And finally,
I mean, they're on a tectonic, you know what I mean, like the little space in between, you know, the little divides between the plates where you tend to have more, like, seismic activity and...
Borneo is geographically located nearly precisely in the center of the entire Indonesian archipelago, and there are several developing city areas nearby the proposed location that stand to grow immensely over time. In total, Indonesia hopes to create a new capital territory on Borneo that will cover nearly 700 square miles, slightly larger than the City of London's area and more than twice the size of present-day Jakarta. It is also President Widodo's hope that, eventually, this new capital will be home to 1.4 million government employees and their families, potentially reaching upwards of a population of 7 million people all in all.
Dude, Indonesia's interesting.
Futuristic designs already picked out for the more important government buildings like the Presidential Palace and more. All that's left is to fund the effort and begin construction.
Presidential Palace, that smells of royalty. Gross. We have basically a lot of similar stuff, but we kind of like hide it in humble words. Like uh I guess the White House itself, though that's not originally what they called it, that in itself kind of like dumbs down the over the top nature of it as a government building.
Construction. The total estimated price tag for building the new Capitol here is around $34 billion. But with extensive delays in the project stemming from the COVID-19 pandemic, budget cuts, and other mounting pressures, President Widodo certainly has his work cut out for him over the next several years, as he oversees the remainder of his second term as president. Since he hopes to begin moving at least some government offices over to Borneo in 2024, he only has 2 short years remaining to accomplish it while he's still in office. And as for Jakarta, even though the city is definitely facing some pretty serious hurdles over the coming decades, Widodo's hope is that encouraging millions of people to leave the city for the new capital over on Borneo will be enough to relieve at least some of the pressure and allow Jakarta precious time to recover and thrive once again. So, a lot of people have asked me for years now how I make videos on YouTube like this one, and how I got started. Honestly, it all began with just saving up enough money from my side job while I was in college.
Okay, so this is like still a new video, so I feel obligated to let the little ad portion play out because the promo code probably still active. So this ad currently applies. It's not like one of those old ads.
To build my own beefy editing computer that could handle all of the animations and the footage that I wanted to create and splice together. And probably unlike the middle of the rainforest in Borneo, Micro Center is one of the best places in the world to shop for all of your technology needs. Whether you want to get started creating your own animated YouTube videos like I do, or you just want something to handle all of the latest games you're playing, Micro Center's got everything you need, from desktops to PC parts to monitors, and they've got 25 stores across the United States, so the odds are there's probably one pretty close by.
Do you have one close to me? Do you have one close to me? I guess there's one in Cambridge.
You. And if you're
I could get there on a day trip.
PC, you should really check out the Micro Center Custom PC Builder to spec out exactly what you want.
I don't know why I'm
it's super convenient.
Pausing during an ad.
Guarantees
Just
that
gonna make it go
parts
longer.
you're selecting are compatible or not. It'll find the parts at your nearest Micro Center and can arrange same-day pickup, and for a fee, you can check the box marked Same-Day Pro Assembly to have Micro Center themselves build your creation all for you. But best of all, Micro Center is offering up a ridiculous deal. When you follow the link that's down in the description or click the button that's on screen right now, new customers will receive a completely free 128GB flash drive and a 128GB micro SD card. You don't
probably
even need
use
to purchase anything. It's totally 100% free with no catch, and you just have to go to one of Micro Center's 25 stores in the country to claim it. And as always, thank you so much for watching.
Okay, there we go. That was really fun. I like learning about like the modern geographic issues and the politics behind them. It feels a bit smart for me. I'm a little bit of a doof when it comes to that stuff, despite the fact that my education seems to tell the opposite story. I've historically done pretty well in geography courses, although I don't know a whole lot about it, so who knows how that works. But I am excited to explore this channel a little bit more. It feels like the longer I go doing reacty type things, the more I shift towards other kinds of social studies and social sciences. And I love that I'm able to shift a little bit more towards geography. It puts us very often in a modern setting, one that I don't get to talk about too much with the more historically centered stuff. So this is a really good channel for that. With the Geography Now stuff, I'm on the Geography Now path. That is set before me. There aren't going to be a whole lot of deviations from where we're going with that stuff. There's a lot to this, and it covers a wide variety of places, a wide variety of subjects. I've browsed through some of the videos to see some stuff I might be willing to check out in the future. There are options, and I'm very excited to see where it takes us. So that was today's post show. We just had one video today since it was on the longer side. We are going to be continuing the Crash Course History, not the Crash Course Government and Politics series we did on a future post show. I am also open to other stuff if you guys have any suggestions. So thank you for watching. Thank you for continuing to be channel members, and hopefully I will see you next week with another one of these. I didn't get around to finishing another episode of Red Dead Redemption 2, but I will do that pretty soon. No doubt. All right. Thank you for watching. I will see you next time. Bye.